Hello and welcome back to the channel, and thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. And as you can see, I'm not in my normal studio, and if you've been watching recently, you will know I've been up to Scotland, in fact to Crieff, to the Hydro Hotel in Crieff for a very special reason, because that marvellous lady, Barbara O'Neill, has had a health summit here, and I'm very lucky because she's just agreed to join me to have a conversation. Barbara, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here, Richard.
Have you, and I know I have you enjoyed the 5 days that we've been here with you delivering all your wonderful stuff?
I have, and one of the reasons I know I have is because it's gone so fast.
You travel around the world doing this, and I know that lots of people will be obviously interested in all the health remedies and your books and this, but I want to find out what it's like being such a popular person and traveling around the world. We hear of big film stars who have their entourage and all of this. You've got the lovely Jacqueline who is looking after you. What's it like going from pillar to post? Because I understand that you spend 10 months of the year on the road and only 2 months at home.
Well, it's certainly different. And even if I was at home, there's no children or grandchildren near me anyway. Australia's a very big place. I've got 2 daughters in Tasmania with their children. I've got a few in Queensland. I've got 1 daughter in America, so they're all over the place anyway. But I'm a simple lady that really loves working in my garden and cooking and sewing and those simple things. But God has chosen me to do something else. I had never have had or have wanted to be famous or great, but it appears that seems to be what's happening. And what's it like being in a different place every week? What I do is I adjust wherever I am, and I found that that's the key to be able to do it. Wherever I am, I'm with people who are very interested in health, people who are very excited to see me, and so it makes it easy.
Yes.
It would be hard if I came to someone and said, "Oh, not you again." that you know, you're a threat to public safety. That would be a little difficult, but that is never the case. I'm always with people who are interested in health, who love what I teach, so that makes it very, very easy. And everyone is a person. Everyone, and I know everyone in God's eye is precious and special. And so I really have just learnt to love wherever I am.
I'm thinking that as you go around, the internet, of course, has been something that is new for all of us in the last 20 or so years. And in the old days, you got famous by appearing on people's shows or having documentaries made about you. So the internet is, I mean, certainly for people like me who set up a YouTube channel and see where it will go. But for somebody like you, where you're so known internationally, how have you found the transition from being within Australia to suddenly being known across the world?
Yes, I don't think that my brain really comprehends what's happening, and I've always coped. I mean, you picture me in the rainforest, no electricity, with 6 children. I just learnt to love the moment and live every day as it came, and that's really what I do now. Never in my wildest dreams did I believe, when I was washing the clothes in the rainforest and digging in the garden, that I, with the baby on my back, that I would ever be to what I am today. I think I still don't quite comprehend it, but I never get annoyed with people stopping me, and a lot of people stop me. I've had airline pilots stop me. In fact, recently, I think in one airport, about 4 flight attendants stopped me. I'm just happy to see how happy they are of how they've been helped.
Yes.
That, I love that. And so I smile and I just say, I'm glad. And I'll be sitting in my seat in the plane and someone will stop and say, love what you do. And I'll look up and smile and put my hand up. So what it does mean, Richard, that I can't eat an ice cream. I can't smoke a cigarette. I can't drink alcohol. I'm in a bubble.
Yes.
But, I really don't mind, because if I don't live what I preach, I don't think I should be doing this.
That's very true. And I certainly, as soon as you step outside the things you've spoken about, people will suddenly ask me, well, are you paying a council tax? Are you pushing back against this and all of this? So you have to be authentic and honourable and all those things.
That is so true. And many are not. Like, you would never get a painter whose paint's falling off his house. You would never get a plumber where the plumber's falling down on his house. And that's what I feel a great responsibility to be a living example of what I'm teaching.
You mentioned back then about the rainforest and about being there, which is such a terrific image of being in tune with nature. We've seen over the last 50 years that removal of people from nature into these tarmacked, glass, concrete environments where nature is almost invisible.
That's true.
And where you see even programs on the television for children which are normalizing cityscapes rather than nature. How do we get back to more we're stuck with what we've got now, but how do we introduce more nature into our lives to stay healthy?
It's a good question, Richard, because not everyone can go into a rainforest and live the way I lived. I think you just do what you can. And even if you're living in the city of London, we were very impressed when we were in London last week that there's not near as many overweight and obese people that we see in America, Australian. We see a lot of people bicycling. We see a lot of parks. And we had to be careful when we were walking into the park early in the morning because cyclists are whizzing backwards and forwards on the road. And so even in that environment, there are still the parks. It's a matter of stepping out and accessing what you can, and even getting little pots where you have some aloe vera, you have some parsley, you have some rocket. There's always little bits that you can do no matter where you are.
One of the big things that you talk about is clothing and things against our skin, because our skin, as I've remembered from the talks, our skin is the first line of defense. So many people are choosing artificial fabrics which are not good for us. And there you are, dressed in the Scottish wool, and you look resplendent, of course. And I'm now feeling slightly nervous that I've no idea really what I'm wearing. But that's the thing, we don't know what we're wearing anymore.
No, it's true. And I often quote that little book, The Ministry of Healing, where she says the only hope of better things is the education of people in the right principles. And yes, when I first read that, I thought, yes, getting people to exercise, drink more water, eat more plants. We never actually think much about the fabric that we're wearing. Mm. And yet we, the consumer, have the power. If we all said, I'm going to stop the nylon, acrylic, polyester, I'm going to go for my natural fibre, that little thing can make such a change. It can make a change in us because now our bodies are wearing fabrics that are natural.
Yes.
We come from dust, we go back to dust. We're wearing the sheep's wool that, from the sheep that came from the dust. It is all connected. But not only that is the economy. It affects the economy. So we have had speakers this week saying, we can change this world. I think we can. And a lot of people think, little old me, but this world is full of little old me's.
Absolutely. And I know you're a great advocate for local and seasonal, which is something, again, that in the global society that we're in, and the big supermarkets providing strawberries and various things out of season, that we should get back to those local things. And I know you have reasons for it.
Yeah, that is true. And as a nutritionist, looking at the body, how it breaks down food, how it functions, that the foods that are in season are actually the very foods that our body needs in that climate at that time of year. So that's also important. And another important fact is that the food that's available and that is usually the cheapest, that's what's actually grown now.
Yes.
And my husband pointed this out to me once when I was summer and I went to the markets and they had a whole box of grapes for $6. I got 2 boxes, came home, and I was so proud of my purchase. And he looked at it and he said, "They're last year's grapes." I said, "How do you know?" He said, "Look at the stem. The stems were dried up and brown." He said, "If they were new season grapes, the stem would be green." I hadn't even thought of that.
And if you, well, that's it. I'm sure most housewives or husbands, whatever, probably also don't know, because the food, we barely look at food.
Yes, yes. And you look at the old Italian woman in the fruit and vegetable shop, she's smelling everything.
Yes.
And I always get my husband to get the peaches because he smells everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But that's, I mean, you mentioned there, I mean, food is obviously part of the whole health picture for you, and you mention it very, very frequently. But even then, greengrocers, certainly in this country, are barely on the high street. Butchers have disappeared pretty much. All the small independent shops that you would get personal service and who know about what it is and where the food has come from are disappearing.
That's true.
That must affect the health of people.
It absolutely does. When we went first to the town, well, it's an hour from where we live. It's called Kempsey. There was a big shop there called Barsby's, and I loved going in there because it had a haberdashery department. That's all your fabrics and your cottons, and then it had a ladies' clothes, men's clothes. And in the old days, that's what it was. And the lady in the haberdashery department, she'd worked there for 50 years. Isn't that wonderful? She knew everyone in the shop. But you're talking more about food, and I agree. When I was a little girl, there was a butcher shop, there was a bakery, the bread shop, then there was, you call it a greengrocer, the vegetable shop. But when you go to America now, everything's huge. They're all huge, big supermarkets like Costco's and Walmart. And when you go in there, there's everything from food, even in America, to guns,
Gosh.
to clothes. Everything's there. And you look on the label, made in China, made in China, made in China. And that's why I say to people, support your local industries. And I think it's tragic that in Scotland and Ireland, the only people buying the wool are the tourists. So if I want to buy some wool socks, I have to go to the tourist shops.
Yes. And you're probably paying over the odds at the same time. You mentioned America, and I have been to America twice on two-week road trips, and it's a fascinating place. I'm not sure I personally would want to live there, but it's great to visit. As you say, everything is very big, and the people. Do you despair? I mean, you've been going back to these places. Do you despair that people are not getting healthier? What would be your thoughts?
Well, Richard, often depends on the circles that you mix with.
Yes.
Because obviously in the circles I mix with and the people that come to my meetings, they're interested in it. But in the little town of Roanoke, Alabama, and it's about 20 minutes from a health retreat that I usually run there once or twice a year, the people are just huge. And the food, and you know what's the most popular because that's right out in the aisles. It's just white cakes with green icing and pink icing, boxes and boxes and boxes of this. And one can despair. And then one goes to Ireland, and then one goes to the Happy Pear, this wonderful shop where this identical twins, these guys, I think they're in their 40s now, have this amazing restaurant. They don't call it vegan because half the people wouldn't come. Because unfortunately vegans got such a bad name, and in some cases it's warranted. But it's the most beautiful food, and they're lined up out the street.
Wow.
And they have sourdough breads, they have local little, fruit and vegetables that's grown. I love going there. And you go there and you're revived. You go there and you're encouraged because you know that there is a movement, and it's almost a popular movement amongst the young people, to be a little bit different. You go to America and yes, there are pockets of that. So I've got a friend who has a bread company, sourdough gluten-free, and he's making 6,000 to 8,000 loaves a day.
My goodness.
So you see that, obviously it's popular.
Yes.
So, and his bread is all organic, and I love it. He's only about 45, I think, and he's fit and young and got a family, and I love supporting local businesses. And I love in my lectures to say, please, go to the farmers markets, go to those little shops and support them. Walk past the big companies. And a lot of people don't think about where is their dollar going.
Mm.
But when I was in Germany a few weeks ago, up near the Baltic Sea, walking around the Baltic Sea, and there were little towns and shops and restaurants, and outside there were tables and chairs. But it was a bit cool.
Right.
So there were little blankets on every chair. I thought, oh, isn't that nice? Until I got up close. Polyester blankets.
Oh.
I was so discouraged. Now, you see, all of those polyester blankets, I ended up seeing hundreds of them. What were they 50 years ago? They would have been woolen.
Yes.
And when that does a light rain or a spray off the sea comes, it lands on the wool and it just sits there.
Yes. Yes.
And it really keeps you warm. And that's why with my dying breath, Richard, I will do this. Because the world needs to know, because so many people, they've got this lovely fluffy blanket on their lounge. It's polyester.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, but it's so soft. I said, yeah, but it's plastic. It's a total deception.
I suppose people are really only now, in the last, say, 5 years, I think the vaccine that we went through has started to make people think more about their health. This great big global initiative that people should do something to help them. Now, whether or not, of course, we may disagree with whether it was useful or not, dancing on eggshells on YouTube, but it has brought a lot more people's attention to health and things that relate to health, like you say, with the clothing, with the plastics, the microplastics that are everywhere. So do you find that you're becoming more popular all the time with the messages that you're giving out?
I think it is so. 2020, lockdown, we were locked down. A lot of people in their homes started to Google. And so it was actually because of the lockdown, a lot of people discovered me.
Right.
Instead of being at work all day and busy, they were sitting. And so they started scrolling and they found things. So I think that's interesting. So I think that's one point. And another point is I think people started to think this isn't right. There must be something else. And also I know in Australia, in some hospitals, you could not go in unless you'd had the shot. So a lot of people were confronted with looking at health for a few reasons. The lockdown, the restrictions on freedom, the restrictions on going to what we have been taught from young children, that's where you go if you get sick, but also getting frustrated with, well, my child's been on antibiotics for 6 weeks now and she's still got an earache. Just being confronted with... So there's a few different things here. I would like to think that a lot of people's eyes have been opened, but then when I talk in other circles, I wonder.
Yes, I know what you mean. Only a few weeks ago, my partner Julia's son tripped and fell and had a nasty gash on his head. And we sort of were a bit nervous about going to a hospital because we thought, what will they do? How's it going to happen? But in the end, it was okay. We did take him in. But I was looking at the other, in the children's area, as he was being attended to, and there were babies, and I spoke to one woman, and this poor little baby was very upset and crying. He was on his second week's lot of antibiotics for something, and you just think, oh my God, what are you doing? You've not even given any other option a chance. That's a very strong message that you give in your talk.
It is a strong message, and really it's that very thought, that very aspect that really rocketed me into this. I have felt the frustration of having a sick child. I've just been given the 5th course of antibiotics. I don't want to give her any more antibiotics, but I don't want to put her at risk. I don't want her to go deaf like everyone's telling me. That is a very, very frustrating place to be in. And that is why I really do what I do, because I want to show parents, grandparents, that there actually is another way. And I was so excited when my book Sustain Me finally was printed. I think the graphic designer had it for a year, but when I look at what he did, I am very thankful. He did a beautiful job. I wanted it to be a handbook on natural remedies, and I think it would be wonderful if every home had one. So if there's a problem, we look it up.
Yes.
And this is another point, Richard, nip it in the bud. So as soon as something happens, you start to work on it. But another thing, and I say this to mothers many times, do you know that every child in the whole world has had a sore throat? Did you know that every child in the whole world has had a fever? Do you know that every child in the whole world gets a cold? And if you do nothing, it will pass. That's actually the first thing I say. But these simple natural remedies can bring relief.
That's very interesting, because if you look at today's families, we're split apart. We used to live very much more as bigger families, and advice was handed down from grandparent to mother to so on. And now, you know, sometimes when I'm listening to you, I think, gosh, that's what my grandmother would have said. But we're in such an immediate world. People want instant remedies, and they'll go to the doctor, and trust in those old ways seems to have waned.
It has, and I think you just mentioned one important point, Richard, is quick fixes. Someone has a rash, they put cortisone on, it's gone. There was a girl here this week, and I knew she was on cortisone. Her whole body was red, and she only looked like she was in her 30s, and she was now addicted to cortisone for eczema. She said, what do I do? I said, make the dietary changes, and then you're going to have to ease off very slowly. The body's going to object, but you just have to go very, very slowly. So they're quick fixes. It's almost like buy now, pay later.
Yeah.
And
we know how that goes. You buy furniture like that, falling apart by the time you've got to pay for it.
That's right. So you have to get another one. That is true, that there's this time factor. And that's why I give the story of my daughter Emma at the age of 5 saying, Mum, I'm going to grow up in a minute. I give that story as a point that Emma didn't grow up in a minute. In fact, it took her another 15 years.
I'm still growing up.
Yes. But I give it as an illustration, and, you know, a spoonful of medicine, sugar helps the medicine go down. I say a spoonful of laughter gets a point in a little bit further, that it's going to take a little bit of time. And I also use the other cliche, it took 20 years to get this, but it won't take 10, 20 years to undo. But it might take a year.
It might take a year.
So it's patience.
Yes. And do you think people have got patience?
No.
No.
And I have to tell you, Richard, I haven't. In fact, when my wrist was in plaster for 6 weeks, I think it was the longest 6 weeks of my life. But in the Bible it says, in everything give thanks. So I said, thank you, Father in heaven, it's not my right hand.
Well, of course, absolutely.
And thank you, Father in heaven, it wasn't my foot, I can walk. So it's, and I think that also helps with healing, is to be thankful. Well, yes, this happened, but I could be dead. That's why I used that statement that a lady said to Michael, what if I wake up dead?
Well, you wouldn't have to worry too much, I suppose. You mentioned thanking God. You use a lot of Bible quotes in there, and you're using that. Presumably, there's lots of people in the audience who may or may not be religious. They may not even follow the same religion that you do. You're quite you're fearless of using that in different environments. Do you ever get any pushback?
I actually don't, and I am very respectful. I'm very mindful of where I am and who I'm speaking to. So in Kuala Lumpur, when I was speaking to Hindus and Muslims, and I could see Sikhs from many different cultures, I went very lightly. And because I've memorised everything I present, I slip it in and keep moving. And then I slip in a little bit more and keep moving. And one lady said to me, when you said a Bible verse, I was about to leave. But she said, but it was interesting. And she said, in the next Bible verse, I wasn't as quick to want to leave. And the next Bible verse, I was sort of starting to handle it.
Oh, that is brilliant. When did you, were you always religious? Were you brought up in a religious household? Or
I was, but we only really talked about God for an hour on Sunday morning.
Right.
And that was Presbyterian because I'm fifth generation Scottish descent. And then I did go a little bit wild. I did drugs and alcohol and a whole lot of stuff. And then when I was 25, I had 2 little children and some people moved next door and they were Christians. And I was a little bit hesitant at first. In fact, the girl came over one day and said, we're doing a Bible study. Would you like to come? I said, no, thank you very much. In fact, I was almost offended. I thought, I'm not interested in Bible studies. But, little by little, as we became friends, and then also my first husband had an affair, which just broke my heart. And these people were so tender. They said, let us pray for you. And it brought comfort to my aching heart. And I started to soften. And then I discovered that they were vegetarians, and I'd just become a vegetarian. And they were Seventh-day Adventists. And I started to look at some of their things, and then I remember thinking, I don't want to be forced into anything. So I started to read. I thought, I'm going to read the Bible for myself. I don't want to be influenced by anything. And I discovered things in there that just opened my eyes. Mm. I discovered that, wow, God is interested in our health because I was a bit of a hippie. I found things that I didn't even realise was in the Bible because often we as humans, as children, we go to a church or we go to a religious thing and we're just taught things. We don't look for ourselves. And so after looking at all this, I thought to myself, I'm going to give this a go. And so I remember the night I got down on my knees. I said, Father in heaven, I'm going to give you a try. And I decided to let God be my guide through life. And I have to tell you, Richard, how long ago was that? So anyway, I'm not good on maths, but I'm 71 now. It was a long time ago, and I believe it was one of the best decisions that I've made because I didn't know what was ahead, and I'm so glad God doesn't tell you what's ahead.
Well, exactly.
But my life went in ups and downs, and I had some tragedies in my life, and I ended up having to flee my mountain home when I was 40 with the clothes on my back, and yet God always had a solution. He always had a way through every situation. So becoming a Christian didn't mean I was now on a bed of roses. And of course, every rose bush has thorns. But what I found was I was not alone. And what I found was that there was a way and there was a solution through every situation.
One of the most repeated verses that you've said, I think, must be about taking advice. Could you just give us that verse, because you do it so well.
I will, and I'll even give you the next 2 afterwards because I think that's important. So it's Psalm 146, verse 3. I was so excited to discover this verse, Richard, and I discovered it about 10 months ago. Put not your trust in princes, no matter who I talk to, Richard, they love it.
Yes.
Because I say, well, who are the princes? They're the authorities. And the authorities have hurt and disillusioned so many people. So people are surprised that that's in the Bible. Put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. His breath goes forth, he returns unto his earth. In that very day his thoughts perish. Happy is he that hath the God of Jacob as his help, whose hope is in the Lord his God, that made heaven, earth, sea, and all that therein is, which keeps truth forever.
Fantastic. My goodness. And it must have taken a while to find those verses in the Bible that you suddenly go, wait a minute, that's...
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. You know, it goes on to show, opens the blind eyes. And I mentioned this the other day, that one of Jesus' first things he read in the Bible was to set the captives free, to open the blind eyes. And dear, I find that there's application to health. And last week it was in Transylvania, up in Romanian hills, a lady came to me. She was 33. She had a walking stick. And her story was just tragic. This operation, that operation, this operation. Last thing, a stem cell transplant that her body was now rejecting. I tell you, Richard, I almost wanted to cry. Who had done this to her? The princess.
Yes.
The princess. But you know what? They think they're doing good.
Not all of them. I would argue there that some of them know exactly what they're doing.
But it's what they're taught. I'm
Yes.
not against the doctor. I think that there are some ethical doctors. I think there are some excellent ones. But they should not put their trust in the princes in the pharmaceutical companies.
Absolutely, yes. And the pharmaceutical companies have caused, with their greed, so many problems.
So many.
And that's a continual thing, I imagine, that you're fighting. You're fighting people's natural reaction to go to their GP. I mean, when I was young, we had a family doctor. He knew the history of the family, and you'd go. He actually, I think, the very first of our doctors, I remember being very small. It was in his house, and he had his own consulting room. Now, if you want to make an appointment 3-4 weeks, unless it's an emergency, you've got to fight with the receptionist.
That is true, Richard. And you know what the family doctor was trained in? Reading bodies.
Right.
Reading people. Now they read the computer. Reading bodies. And I can remember the Johnston boys pushed me over when I was 6 and cut my knee on the cement. Mum took me to the doctor. Dr. Johnson was his name. And you know what he did? He just taped my knee. He was our family doctor.
Yeah.
He just taped my knee. So I actually have never had a stitch.
Fantastic. Oh, absolutely.
He just taped it. But the art of diagnosis, of reading a body, reading the symptoms, that's almost been lost.
Yeah. I lost my left eye. I had a acanthamoeba, which is a bug, and I remember sitting there in front of the consultant, and he started to type on Google what this problem was.
Oh, no.
And at that point, I said, "I'm sorry, I don't have any faith in you anymore."
How old were you?
I was. It was only 15 years ago.
Okay.
So, and I saw him doing this, and I just said, "You're the consultant, you're looking it up on Google," and he spouted some rubbish, we don't know everything. And so he immediately discharged me and says, "I'm sending you to Moorfields in London now," which actually was better. I'm not going to say it's better treatment because I lost the eye. I was subsequently told iodine would have saved the eye. So, it's one of those things. But
it's one of those things.
It's one of those things. But I'm pleased in a way I went through it because I suffered something, and I have a huge appreciation for people.
Richard, did it open your eyes?
It certainly, not only did it open it, I could take it out, put it in a glass of water. But what it did do is it made me appreciate people can have pain and you can't see it.
It's true.
And unless, we always normally say, unless somebody's got a limp or their blood's coming out, or their arms are cut off or something, that you think, oh yeah, you're going through something. But people go through a lot of trauma that you never actually see, and they're putting a brave face on.
Yeah. And that's why I loved the book that I read, The Gift of Pain, by Dr. Paul Brand, and how he says if you don't listen to your first whisper, the body will start screaming, and when it starts screaming, it's doing damage. And people have lost the art of listening.
They certainly have.
Listening. What is your body telling you? And instead of just taking something to kill that pain, why is that pain there? And investigating. That's why I love that formula. Look at the history. Look at the symptoms. I'll tell you where to go and where to start. And then watch your body's response. What's your body saying? I like this. Can you please don't do it that way again?
Yes. I love the advice you give about listening to the doctor and then withdrawing.
Yes. Because so many people feel guilty or they feel they must. But that's why I say thank you so much for your advice. I'm gonna seriously consider this. And if you have a child, that's about the only way you can get out.
Yes.
Is to take that script and say, I'm going to seriously consider this. And I say, leave quickly because there's a whole waiting room there.
Yeah. And I suppose we, through the way that we've been brought up with our hands up at school to go and, please can I go and relieve myself and do a natural biological function that you need permission to. We've been led all the time to obey authority. So when you're sitting in front of the GP and he's saying, I think you should take this, it's very difficult to fight the urge for a lot of people to say, actually, no, I'm not going to. So I think
It is far better because it's stressful to go into a dialogue. My husband actually quite enjoys it.
Yes, I can imagine that.
But it's stressful to go into that dialogue. And the other thing is if he thinks you're not doing right, especially if it's a child, he can arrange for social services to go and knock on your door. And one lady told me they knocked on her door and said, are you giving your baby food yet?
My goodness.
This is incredible. And these were quite wealthy people. They lived in a very beautiful house. She was a violinist, husband an accountant. So with this, there's no limit to who you are. This organisation has power. And the other thing my husband pointed out, so we're on the news every night, 2021, and the people that are making comments on this COVID, they're not doctors.
No.
They're newsmen.
Yes.
And who's coming over on the news telling you what to do? People with no medical training at all. Mind you, the people with medical training, you question that as well. But we thought, isn't that incredible? And this thought came to my mind. My grandfather was a light horseman in the First World War. He went to war with a total disregard for his safety to fight for my freedoms. My freedoms are now being taken away from me under the guise of safety.
Isn't that incredible?
Yes.
Everything is for our benefit, and yet when you look underneath the bonnet, there's nothing there.
Yes,
where's the benefit?
Yes, it is not. And that's why I love that Rudyard Kipling's poem, all we know of freedom, all we have and use, this our fathers fought for us long and long ago. Long forgotten bondage, dwarfing hearts and minds, this our fathers died to loose, shall be bound again.
Beautiful.
It's called The Old Issue. That's the name of the poem.
Oh, brilliant. You're obviously a good reader. You must read a lot in your travels around. Do you take books with you?
I do. I've got about 4 I'm reading at the moment. I love reading. And I love reading because I can read at my pace. I can note. And every book teaches me something. Some books teach me a lot. Some books teach me a little bit. And if someone says, this is a good book, read it, I get it straight away. And a lot of the knowledge that I have in my mind, yes, it's experimental. Yes, I've learnt it. Yes, I've got it from old ladies, but a lot of it from books.
And a lot of people don't read enough, but I tell you, 1 book or 2 books they should be reading. I believe there's a book called Sustain Me that's pretty popular at the moment. Yes. And the other one is called
Self-Heal by Design.
Self-Heal by Design. Both of those, of course, by Barbara O'Neill. And you made reference to them, and people have bought them, and my goodness, people are so keen to have you to sign them. You must do loads of these signings, and they tell you some fascinating things. You told me about one lady connected to wool. Just relate that story for me.
Oh, it was very exciting for me, Richard, because I'm signing book after book, and she had tartan on, and I said, I love your tartan. She said, I'm a shepherdess. I said, really? She said, yes, I'm a shepherdess, and thank you so much for what you said about wool, about local industry, about our sheep. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time has run out, but it's been so lovely to meet you, to listen to you, to watch the people's reactions to you. People love you all around the world. You are obviously sent here to do this work. Long may that continue. Sustain me, and I always forget the second one. Self-Heal by Design. 2 books. I'll put the links in the description. Do check them out. They will be available at the Good Food Project. A big thanks to Steve for setting this up. Barbara, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you for spending 45 minutes or so with me. Good luck with whatever else you do. We'll be following. And Julia and I, the first video we saw of you was where you were talking about Celtic sea salt and water and getting it into the cell. And we do that religiously every day. So thank you for improving our health and everybody else's.
That's good to hear. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you very much. Well, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back with more monologues and more wonderful guests. But until the next time, from the wonderful Barbara and myself, goodbye.